The flickering neon sign outside Damon Valrek's office cast an erratic purple glow through the grime-streaked window. Inside, Damon slouched in his battered leather chair, absent-mindedly sifting through a pile of mundane divorce cases while sipping a tepid cup of synthetic coffee. The corroded metallic walls of his office groaned under the unrelenting wind of planet Arion 5, a constant reminder of its toxic atmosphere. 3 sharp knocks at the door startled him out of his monotony. "Come in," he called, straightening his gray shirt and running a hand through his unruly dark hair. The door slid open with a hiss, and Damon's breath caught. A woman stood in the doorway, her skin a vivid emerald green that shimmered faintly under the harsh lighting. Her long, wavy auburn hair partially obscured a face filled with anguish. She wore a cream-colored tunic and form-fitting teal trousers that complemented her striking appearance. But it was her eyes, brimming with desperation and unshed tears, that held his attention. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I need your help." Damon gestured toward the chair across from him. "Take a seat, Miss Lirona Van," she said, perching on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to flee at a moment's notice. "What can I do for you, Miss Van?" "It's my daughter, Seryn. She's missing." Lirona twisted her hands together, her knuckles pale despite her green skin. "It's been 3 days since she disappeared on her way home from the academy." Damon frowned. "Have you contacted the local authorities?" "Of course." Her voice cracked. "They claim they're investigating, but I know how things work here on Arion 5. Without credits or connections, they won't prioritize her case. She's just another statistic to them." Damon hesitated. "I usually handle smaller cases, spousal infidelity, insurance fraud. Missing persons, especially children, are better left to law enforcement." Lirona stood abruptly, her hands trembling as they gripped the hem of her tunic. Before Damon could process what she was doing, she began lifting it, revealing an intricate bodice of emerald silk beneath. "Wait!" Damon raised his hands, a flush rising to his face. "That's not necessary." She froze, vulnerability and defiance warring in her expression. Slowly, she lowered the tunic back into place. "I'll help you," Damon said quickly. "No charge, but I can't promise results." Tears spilled down Lirona's cheeks, and her voice broke. "Thank you. I didn't know where else to turn. She's all I have." Damon pulled out a datapad, trying to regain his composure. "Tell me everything. When was the last time you saw her? Who are her friends? Has anything been unusual lately?" As Lirona recounted every detail about her daughter, Damon couldn't shake the feeling that this case was far from routine. Something about it felt larger, more dangerous. He just hoped they'd both live to find out what. The following morning, Damon and Lirona stood outside the imposing facade of the Arion Elite Academy. Its gleaming white structure stood in stark contrast to the surrounding urban decay, mocking the corroded streets below. "Seryn loved it here," Lirona murmured, her hand brushing Damon's arm. "She was always excited about her science projects, her friends." Damon nodded, gently patting her hand before stepping aside to maintain professionalism. "Tell me about her routine. What time did she leave? Who did she usually walk with?" "She left at 0700 hours, always with her best friend, Kia. They'd take the hover tram together." Lirona's voice quivered. "I've tried reaching Kia's family, but they've been evasive." As they approached the academy's entrance, the security scanner swept over them with an invasive beam. Lirona flinched, her sweater shifting to reveal more of her luminous green skin. Damon forced himself to stay focused. Inside, they met with the academy's administrator, a portly human named Orlon Threx. His thinning hair and damp palms added to his untrustworthy demeanor, and the synthetic air freshener in his office barely masked its mustiness. Yes, very unfortunate about young Seryn," Threx muttered, barely glancing up from his screen. "We've provided all relevant information to the authorities." "What about her best friend, Kia?" Damon pressed. "She's also been absent." Threx paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I'm not at liberty to discuss other students' attendance." Damon leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Funny thing about liberty, it's amazing how quickly it can disappear, like children vanishing on their way home from school." Threx's face reddened. Are you threatening me, Mr. Valrek? Just making an observation, Damon replied, his tone icy. Like how the Academy security cameras conveniently malfunctioned 3 days ago. Lirona gasped softly. Threx's pallor turned ashen. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything yet, Damon said, standing to his full height and towering over the desk. But I will be back with real questions, the kind that make people sweat. Outside the office, Lirona grabbed Damon's arm, her grip tight. How did you know about the cameras? I didn't, Damon admitted, guiding her toward a quieter corridor. But his reaction confirmed my suspicion. Something's wrong here, Lirona. Very wrong. They found an empty classroom, and Lirona began pacing. Damon leaned against the desk, watching her movements. As fear and determination flickered across her face, he couldn't help but feel that whatever dark truths lay ahead, they were only just beginning to unravel. Chapter 2. Shadows Beneath the Surface. The sterile halls of the Arion Elite Academy felt suffocating, the hum of fluorescent lights blending with the faint buzz of security drones floating overhead. Damon leaned against the desk in the empty classroom, his arms crossed, while Lirona paced restlessly. Her green skin seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, a stark contrast to the dull metallic tones of the building. We need to move quickly, Damon said, breaking the silence. If those cameras really were tampered with, someone here knows more than they're letting on. Lirona stopped mid-stride and turned to face him. What's our next step? We can't trust the Academy, and the authorities won't help. Damon pulled a sleek, compact device from his jacket pocket, a signal scrambler. He activated it with a soft beep, ensuring their conversation wouldn't be overheard. We start with Kia's family. If they're avoiding you, they might know something. Either they're scared, or they're hiding something. Lirona's hands clenched at her sides. Seryn trusted Kia. If she knows anything, we'll find out, Damon interrupted, his voice steady. But I need you to be prepared. This isn't going to be easy. Lirona nodded, her jaw set with determination. Whatever it takes. The hover tram ride to the residential sector of Arion 5 was a jarring juxtaposition of sleek technology and urban decay. The tram itself was a relic from a more prosperous era, its windows scratched and its seats worn thin. Outside, towering spires of chrome and glass stood alongside crumbling tenements, the city's wealth disparity laid bare. Kia's family lived in one of the older districts, where the air filters struggled to keep out the planet's acidic atmosphere. The building was a gray, boxy structure with rust streaks running down its sides. Damon and Lirona stepped out of the tram and approached the entrance, the faint hiss of leaking gas from nearby vents adding to the area's oppressive atmosphere. Damon knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. They're home, Lirona said, her voice tight. I can feel it. Damon crouched, pulling a small tool from his pocket. With practiced ease, he pried open the door's access panel and began bypassing the lock. Lirona's eyes widened. You're breaking in? Just a gentle nudge, Damon muttered, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. The lock clicked, and he pushed the door open. The apartment inside was dark, the only light coming from the flickering holographic advertisements visible through the window. The air was stale, tinged with the acrid scent of burnt circuits. Damon stepped inside, motioning for Lirona to follow. Kia's parents, Lirona whispered. They wouldn't just leave. Damon scanned the room. It looked hastily abandoned. A half-eaten meal sat on the table, and a datapad blinked with an unread message. He picked it up, tapping the screen to unlock it. The message was encrypted, but a name caught his eye. Nyrek Consortium. Nyrek Consortium, Damon murmured. They're a corporate giant, mostly mining and tech. But why would they be involved? Lirona's breath hitched. Seryn mentioned them once, something about a scholarship program. She was excited, said it was for promising young scientists. Corporate scholarships don't come without strings, Damon said grimly. If the consortium's involved, this isn't just a missing person case. This is about power. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Damon shoved the datapad into his pocket and pulled Lirona into the shadows. A moment later, two figures entered the apartment, both clad in black tactical gear with the Nyrek Consortium's insignia on their shoulders. They cleaned up fast, one of them muttered, scanning the room with a handheld device. "No sign of the family." "Doesn't matter," the other replied. "We've got orders to sweep the place and report back." "Let's move." Damon exchanged a glance with Lirona, his hand tightening around the small blaster concealed under his jacket. Lirona's expression was a mix of fear and anger, her glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. As the operatives began searching the room, Damon leaned close to her ear. "Stay quiet. We'll follow them when they leave." Lirona nodded, her breathing steady despite the tension. The operatives moved quickly, gathering scattered belongings into a bag. One of them paused, lifting a small hollow frame displaying a photo of Kia and Seryn together, laughing in their academy uniforms. The operative sneered, then tossed it aside. Lirona's hands clenched into fists, but Damon grabbed her arm, silently urging her to stay still. After a few tense minutes, the operatives left, carrying the bag of belongings. Damon and Lirona waited until their footsteps faded before stepping out of the shadows. "What now?" Lirona asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We tail them," Damon said, his jaw set. "If the consortium's cleaning up, they're hiding something. And whatever it is, it's tied to Seryn's disappearance." Under the dim light of the city's neon glow, Damon and Lirona trailed the operatives through the winding streets of the residential district. The duo was careful to stay out of sight, ducking behind dumpsters and into alleyways whenever the operatives glanced back. Eventually, the operatives reached a nondescript hover vehicle and loaded their haul into the back. Damon motioned for Lirona to stay put while he crept closer, activating a small tracking device and tossing it onto the vehicle's underside. The device stuck with a faint magnetic click. As the vehicle sped off into the night, Damon returned to Lirona. "We've got them," he said, pulling out his datapad to monitor the tracker. "Now we see where they're headed." Lirona's eyes glimmered with hope. "Do you think they'll lead us to Seryn?" Damon looked at her, his expression grim. "If she's caught up in whatever the Nyrek Consortium is doing, we'll find out soon enough. But we need to be ready for anything." As they watched the tracker move across the city map, Damon couldn't shake the feeling that they were diving headfirst into a storm far bigger than either of them had anticipated. Chapter 3. Into the Lion's Den. The tracking device led Damon and Lirona deep into Arion 5's industrial sector, a sprawling maze of factories, warehouses, and corporate compounds. The area reeked of ozone and oil, and the faint hum of machinery filled the air, underscored by the distant hiss of venting steam. Damon crouched behind a pile of rusted shipping crates, his datapad glowing faintly as he monitored the tracker. "They stopped just up ahead," he whispered, tilting the screen toward Lirona. The map displayed a blinking that inside a massive warehouse bearing the insignia of the Nyrek Consortium. Lirona peered past the crates, her luminous green skin barely concealed in the dim light. "How do we get in?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with tension. Damon scanned the perimeter. The warehouse was surrounded by a high fence, its gates guarded by sentries armed with pulse rifles. Security drones buzzed overhead, their searchlights sweeping the compound. "Subtlety isn't an option," Damon muttered. But he trailed off, his eyes landing on a ventilation shaft near the back of the warehouse. "That might work. It's risky, though." Lirona followed his gaze and nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes. If Seryn is in there, I'm not leaving without her." Damon hesitated. Her determination was admirable, but he couldn't ignore the danger. "Stick close to me," he said firmly. "We do this together." Navigating the industrial sector's labyrinthine back alleys, Damon and Lirona reached the base of the warehouse. The shaft Damon had spotted was rusted and barely large enough for a person to crawl through. He pried open the grating with a crowbar, the metal shrieking in protest, and gestured for Lirona to go first. Inside, the air was thick and acrid, stinging their eyes and throats. They moved in silence, the narrow confines of the shaft forcing them to crawl single file. Damon's heart pounded as he led the way, his blaster gripped tightly in one hand. After what felt like an eternity, they reached an opening that overlooked the warehouse interior. Damon peeked through the grating and felt his stomach churn. The warehouse floor was a hive of activity. Rows of children, including a few teens, sat at long tables, their faces illuminated by the cold blue glow of monitors. They were working silently, assembling intricate devices under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Damon's gaze darted across the room, searching desperately. "Seryn," Lirona whispered, clutching his arm. She pointed to a table near the center of the room. A young girl with green-tinted skin and auburn hair sat hunched over, her small hands deftly assembling components. Damon exhaled sharply. "We found her," but his relief was short-lived. Across the room, a tall figure in a crisp black uniform stepped into view. His sharp features and cold, calculating eyes marked him as someone in charge. Damon recognized him from countless dossiers. Director Kael Dravek, the head of Nyrek's covert operations. Dravek spoke into a communicator, his voice low but authoritative. Whatever he was saying caused the guards to shift uneasily. Moments later, a massive door on the far side of the warehouse opened, and two hulking enforcers dragged a struggling man into the room. "That's Kia's father," Lirona gasped. The man's face was bruised and bloodied, his clothes torn. Dravek approached him, speaking in a tone too quiet for Damon to hear. The man shook his head vehemently, shouting something that made Dravek's expression darken. Without warning, Dravek nodded to one of the guards. A sharp crack echoed through the warehouse as the butt of a rifle connected with the man's temple, sending him crumpling to the floor. Lirona's grip on Damon's arm tightened. "We have to do something." Damon gritted his teeth, his mind racing. "Not yet. If we rush in now, we'll get ourselves and Seryn killed. We need a plan." Damon's plan took shape as they retreated back through the ventilation shaft to avoid detection. Outside, he outlined it to Lirona in hushed tones. "We create a distraction," Damon said, his voice steady. "Something loud enough to draw the guards away from the kids. Once the coast is clear, you grab Seryn and get out of there." "I'll cover you." Lirona frowned. "What about you?" "I'll find my way out. I've done this before." Her expression hardened. "I'm not leaving you behind." Damon gave her a faint smile. "Let's focus on getting Seryn out first. Then we'll figure out the rest." They scavenged the surrounding area for materials, eventually rigging a makeshift explosive from a discarded fuel canister and some scrap electronics. Damon set the timer for 2 minutes and placed the device near a stack of crates on the far side of the warehouse. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at Lirona. She nodded, determination burning in her eyes. The explosion rocked the warehouse, sending flames and debris skyward. Alarms blared as guards scrambled toward the source of the blast. Chaos erupted as workers and drones scattered in confusion. Damon and Lirona slipped through the chaos, weaving between overturned tables and fleeing workers. They reached Seryn, who stared at them in shock. "Mom?" Seryn's voice was barely a whisper. Lirona dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "I'm here, Seryn. I'm here." Damon scanned the room, his blaster at the ready. "We need to move. Now." Together, they darted toward a side exit, but their path was blocked by Dravek, his cold eyes locking onto them. "You've made a grave mistake," Dravek said, his voice like ice. He drew a sleek, high-tech weapon and leveled it at Damon. Damon stepped in front of Lirona and Seryn, raising his blaster. "Try me." For a moment, time seemed to freeze as the two men faced off. Then, with a sharp burst of light, the fight began. Chapter 4. Fight or Flight. Dravek moved with calculated precision, his weapon firing a crackling burst of energy that Damon barely dodged. The searing heat of the blast grazed his shoulder, and the acrid scent of burnt fabric filled the air. Damon dropped into a roll, coming up on one knee to return fire. "Get her out of here!" Damon shouted to Lirona, his voice echoing above the blaring alarms. Lirona hesitated, clutching Seryn's hand tightly. "Damon, you go," he barked, firing another shot that forced Dravek to duck behind a metal support beam. Lirona didn't wait any longer. Gripping Seryn's hand, she bolted toward the side exit. The warehouse floor was a frenzy of chaos. Children running for cover, guards shouting orders, and the strobe of red emergency lights casting everything in a surreal glow. Dravek's voice cut through the cacophony like a knife. "Don't let them leave!" Two guards broke away from the confusion and charged after Lirona and Seryn. Damon fired at them, hitting one square in the chest. The guard collapsed with a grunt, but the second kept coming. Damon cursed under his breath and sprinted after them. Lirona shoved through a side door, her heart pounding as she and Seryn emerged into the cold night air. The industrial district stretched before them, a maze of pipes, machinery, and towering smokestacks. The acrid wind stung her eyes, but she didn't stop. "Keep running," she urged Seryn, pulling her daughter along. "Mom, I'm scared," Seryn said, her voice trembling. "I know, sweetheart. Just stay with me." Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. The remaining guard was gaining ground, his heavy boots pounding against the metal walkway. Lirona's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder. They turned a corner, only to find themselves facing a dead end, an imposing chain-link fence topped with razor wire. "No," Lirona whispered, panic gripping her. She whirled around, positioning herself in front of Seryn as the guard rounded the corner, his rifle raised. "End of the line," he sneered, aiming the weapon. Before he could fire, a blaster shot rang out, and the guard crumpled to the ground. Damon emerged from the shadows, his blaster smoking. "Miss me?" he said, a lopsided grin on his face. Lirona exhaled a shaky breath of relief. "You're insane, you know that?" "Yeah, I get that a lot." Damon turned to Seryn, his expression softening. "You okay, kid?" Seryn nodded, clinging to her mother. "We're not safe yet," Damon said, his tone growing serious. He scanned their surroundings. "There's a maintenance tunnel nearby. It'll get us out of here." The tunnel was dark and damp, its walls streaked with grime and rust. The faint hum of machinery echoed around them as they navigated the narrow passageway. Damon led the way, his blaster drawn, while Lirona stayed close behind, holding Seryn's hand tightly. "What were they making you do in there, Seryn?" Damon asked, glancing over his shoulder. The girl hesitated, her small voice barely audible. "They made us build things. Machines. I didn't know what they were for, but they said we had to finish them, or they'd—" She trailed off, her voice breaking. Lirona wrapped an arm around her daughter, her green skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. "You're safe now," she said softly. "I won't let anything happen to you." Damon frowned, his mind racing. Child labor, armed guards, a corporate cover-up, it all pointed to something far bigger than a simple missing person case. The group emerged from the tunnel into an abandoned sector of the industrial district. The area was quiet, the distant hum of the city muffled by the thick fog that clung to the ground. Damon motioned for them to stop, scanning the area for any signs of pursuit. "We're clear for now," he said, lowering his blaster. Lirona turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Damon. I don't know how we would have gotten out of there without you." Damon shrugged, but there was a softness in his expression. "You're not out of the woods yet. The Nyrek Consortium doesn't let loose ends go. They'll come after you." "What do we do?" Lirona asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We go dark," Damon said. "Lay low, find a place to hide until I can figure out how to deal with this." "But they know who we are," Lirona said. "Wherever we go, they'll find us." Damon hesitated, then sighed. "There's someone I know, a contact off-world. She specializes in erasing identities. If we can get to her, she can help you start over." "Off-world." Lirona's brow furrowed. "But how?" A low rumble interrupted her, and Damon's head snapped up. In the distance, the faint glow of searchlights pierced the fog. "They're already here," he said grimly. "We need to move. Now." Lirona tightened her grip on Seryn's hand as Damon led them deeper into the industrial sector. The fog swirled around them, obscuring their path, but Damon's determination never wavered. The searchlights grew brighter, accompanied by the sound of approaching hovercraft. Damon's mind raced, searching for an escape route. "We'll find a way out," he said, his voice firm. "I promise." As they disappeared into the mist, Lirona glanced back, her heart pounding. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. She'd do whatever it took to protect her daughter. And Damon, with his sharp wit and unyielding resolve, was the only ally she could trust. Chapter 5. The Final Gambit. The fog grew denser as Damon, Lirona, and Seryn hurried through the industrial district. The hum of approaching hovercraft sent tremors through the air, but Damon's focus remained unshaken. He led them through a maze of rusting machinery and abandoned loading docks until they came to a derelict power station. "This way," Damon whispered, motioning toward a side entrance. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior lined with defunct generators and shattered consoles. Lirona pulled Seryn close. "How is this going to help us?" Damon gestured toward an old terminal in the corner. "I've got a trick up my sleeve," he said, pulling a portable transmitter from his coat. "This station still has a direct link to the industrial grid. I can overload the systems in this sector. It'll create a massive EMP blast strong enough to knock out their hovercraft and tracking devices." "And us?" Lirona asked, her voice tight. "We'll have to shield ourselves," Damon replied, nodding toward a nearby maintenance bunker lined with lead panels. "It's risky, but it's the only way to stop them from following you." Seryn tugged on Lirona's arm. "Mom, I don't want to go back to that place." "Please." Lirona knelt and cupped her daughter's face. "You won't," she promised, her green skin glowing faintly in the low light. "I'll keep you safe, no matter what." Damon was already at work, his fingers flying across the terminal's cracked keyboard. Sparks flew as he bypassed security protocols, rerouting the power grid to feed back into itself. The hum of the machinery grew louder, and the air crackled with energy. "They'll know what we're doing," Lirona warned, glancing at the door. "They already know," Damon replied grimly. The first hovercraft arrived moments later, its searchlights slicing through the fog. Armed guards disembarked, their boots echoing against the concrete as they approached the station. "Come out," one of them barked, his rifle at the ready. "You're surrounded." Damon's voice was calm as he finished the last sequence of commands. "Lirona, take Seryn to the bunker." "Now." "What about you?" she demanded. "I'll follow," Damon said, his eyes meeting hers. "But someone has to keep them busy until this thing goes off." Lirona hesitated, then grabbed Damon's arm. "You don't have to do this alone." He gave her a faint smile. "I've got this. Trust me." Reluctantly, Lirona took Seryn's hand and disappeared into the bunker. Damon took a deep breath and turned back to the terminal. The guards breached the entrance, their weapons trained on him. "Step away from the console." Damon raised his hand slowly, his blaster still tucked in his belt. "You really don't want to be here," he said, his tone almost conversational. One of the guards stepped forward, sneering. "Shut it. You're—" The lights flickered, and a low rumble shook the building. The EMP sequence was nearly complete. Damon seized the moment, diving behind a generator as the guards opened fire. Inside the bunker, Lirona held Seryn tightly as the walls shook. The faint glow of the EMP buildup filtered through the cracks in the door. "Mom, is Damon going to be okay?" Seryn asked, her voice small. Lirona's heart ached, but she forced a reassuring smile. "He's brave. He'll make it." A deafening crack split the air as the EMP detonated. The light outside the bunker flared brilliantly before plunging into darkness. When the dust settled, Lirona cautiously opened the bunker door. The industrial district was silent, the once ominous hum of the hovercraft replaced by stillness. Damon lay slumped against a generator, his coat scorched but his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "Damon!" Lirona ran to him, kneeling by his side. He cracked one eye open and managed a weak grin. "Told you I had it." Lirona laughed, tears streaming down her face. "You idiot." Seryn ran up and hugged Damon tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Damon winced, but hugged her back. "Anytime, kid." With the Nyrek Consortium's forces neutralized, Damon guided Lirona and Seryn to a safe house on the outskirts of the sector. His contact, a skilled forger named Vanessa, provided them with new identities and transport off-world. As they prepared to board the ship, Lirona turned to Damon. "Come with us?" He shook his head, his expression bittersweet. "I've still got work to do here." People like Dravek don't just disappear because of one bad night. She hesitated, then leaned in and kissed him gently. Thank you for everything. Damon watched as the ship's ramp closed, carrying Lirona and Seryn to safety. He stood there for a long moment, the wind tugging at his coat, before turning and disappearing into the shadows of the industrial district. For the first time in years, he felt something he thought he'd lost: hope.